Welcome back to Business Talk with me, Michael Avery, and it's time to talk about one of the most dynamic sectors in South Africa at the moment. Undoubtedly, the energy sector, changing faster than the national grid can actually keep up, and leading that private sector charge towards cleaner, more reliable power is Discovery Green. The company's just inked a series of 20-year renewable energy deals with some of the country's biggest corporates, including a landmark agreement with mining giant Glencore. And it's a story about innovation, certainty, and the quiet revolution underway and how South African business sources its power. Joining me now is Andre Nepgen, who's head of Discovery Green, just to talk about these long-term deals and what it signals about the future. Andre, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if you look at where we were even just 5 years ago versus where we are today, it's fair to say that the landscape is evolving at probably faster than any point that we've seen in the last 30 odd years. And you're right at the heart of that. You've just signed this 20-year renewable energy agreement with several blue chip businesses. It's quite a statement of intent. What does that signal about the pace and the scale of South Africa's energy transition? And how confident are you that the private sector is now driving the change that Eskom once controlled?
It is a very exciting time, but I must say this is really year one in the renewable energy or the energy transition in South Africa. If you know, the ERA was only passed at the start of this year, so you had 102 years of a certain way of doing things, and we're sort of at year one, and I think it's really testament if you look at all the activity from the private sector participating. Although in quantum, in volume, compared to how much electricity the country actually needs, and how much renewable needs to be built, it's really just scratching the surface. I mean, there's a lot of news and a lot of activity. But we're really only at the start of this transition. Really the starting blocks.
It's important to frame it that way, because I think we've been talking about where we need to be for so long, ever since the 1998 Energy White Paper, that we sometimes forget it's taken us this long just to get to the starting blocks effectively. And it's so interesting. I wrote in Business Day recently that the Nobel Economic Prize winners were awarded their prize for some groundbreaking research in how countries prosper. And you do that by allowing new technologies, new ways of doing things to displace the old. It's Joseph Schumpeter's old creative destruction. And finally, we're allowing that. We're legislating for that, although there are still challenges. But before we get to that, if you look at your contracts that you've signed, they provide long-term price certain energy for your clients. And I think for business, that's so key. Given South Africa's history of load shedding and diesel costs and policy uncertainty, why do you see energy certainty now as probably one of the most valuable commodities in the boardroom?
It's interesting, and we have a lot of conversations with a lot of clients on there, and the narrative, 2 years ago it was load shedding, and it's amazing how quickly it actually changes, and I think we're now at a point where the conversation, I think a really good job has been done to avoid that shortfall. But now the conversation is really around cost and how do you run your business to try and bring those costs. So over the last sort of decade, we've seen CPI plus 8 or more % increases in the electricity costs. Now, we were fortunate for many years ago to have some of the lowest electricity costs. So initially, these increases didn't feel like much. But they are, I think, from business point of view, they are starting to really bite, especially the large energy users. We spoke about Glencore now. A lot of the big energy users are starting to see that electricity costs are contributing a massive portion of their OPEX. And if that grows faster than sort of your revenue line, and I don't know, many revenue lines are growing faster than CPI plus 8, it starts to really hurt. And businesses are basically looking for two things. They're looking, of course, for, on one side, a saving upfront, which needs to be there. There's the green narrative, which is very strong still for businesses trying to achieve their target. But then there's this price certainty that I think most CFOs in the room absolutely like, because you can plan new projects, you can invest in new projects. So often in the large energy user sector, if you want to build a new project, you cost out your electricity costs going forward. And if you can have some certainty around that, or at least, cap it at a certain level, it turns, previously unviable projects into viable ones. It makes it more palatable, and the certainty is underrated. You need that certainty in your cost going forward. So that's why I think a lot of companies are shifting.
Yeah, especially when you see NERSA making 54 billion rand mistakes. And then you think, oh gosh, I'd planned on one cost. Now, potentially we're facing something vastly different. I mean, you just can't plan. And that certainty will help you then, that drops down to the bottom line. Let's talk about the Terni Solar Park. It's one of the largest solar farms in the country. How does this project fit into Discovery Green's broader ambition to deliver this clean energy at scale? And are there any maybe technological or financial innovations you're particularly excited about with this project?
So the Terni plant, we're very, very excited about. It's our first solar project. It's 300 megawatts. To give you an idea of the scale, it's 800 rugby fields worth of solar panels. It's like the standard of measure now. It is absolutely enormous. But it is, you think of that scale and you think that could power a lot, and it does power a lot. But it is a small portion of what we actually need. If you think about the country sort of plan, you need 4 gigawatts. This is less than 10% of that in terms of what you need per year, really, to build it out. Now, what's exciting about this is the scale gives a lot of economies of scale, gives you advantages, allows you to connect to the grid, and it's an exciting location. It's in the Mpumalanga area. But, this is, in our view, like one ingredient to start sort of the renewable energy transition. Of course, I think we've all a lot of experience in solar. We've all done it on our rooftops. Most businesses have put panels on. The trick is, though, and it's going to sound very elementary, but you kind of need the sun to shine in order to get the energy out of this. And the sun only shines for at most 8 hours a day, really, depending on where you are. So what that means is that you're going to cover, say, 30 to 40% of your consumption if the sun is shining for a business, right? That's a good start. But compared to the rest of the world, where businesses have the option to get almost 100% of renewable energy, the real innovation that really unlocks is you got the first 30-40. You get more diversification if you add on more renewable energy resources. You need wind, you need potentially batteries on that as well. But it's sort of the first ingredient to start eating into that 100% that you want to get to. You want to allow certain companies who have serious targets for emissions to get to 100%. So the big thing, I think, for a solar point of view is now you've got this good 30-40%. Now it's allows you to find ways to get that number even greater, and we hope, from our side to get to, and that's our plan and that's our product, to get to a 90% coverage, which I think is quite amazing for businesses to achieve that target.
What would that require? Would you obviously have to upscale your battery and then diversify to other sources, like you say, wind, which blows 24/7, but only in various locations, and also not all the hours of that 24/7. I mean, what does that look like for you?
So there's sort of two sources of ways to get that percentage up, and the way we approach it is really from a mathematical point of view. So on the one side, you can get multiple different types of generation sources. You can get wind, you can get solar, and that gives you a certain amount of electricity. But I think the real innovation, the real difference is going to be on the other side, where the consumption side is. So every business consumes electricity differently. And you almost got to think of it as Tetris blocks. And you've got a certain generation profile, and you want to fill those clients on the other side, stack them in a certain way, certain types of clients, certain types of industries, so that you can get them a very, very high percentage of renewable energy. So it's all about diversification on the consumption side. I'll give you a very, very simple example. Take a single industry, right? A single company on that. Take manufacturing, for example. December and January is when they actually consume very little energy, because people go on holidays, people take breaks, etc. on that. So at that point in time, you might generate more than you need, and other times of the year less than you need. So what you can look for is to say, instead of saying, unfortunately, we can't give you more electricity, you could say, listen, what other industries can I combine that with? What other industries love energy in December and January to compensate for when the manufacturing don't need electricity. And to give you a very practical example, take the leisure and the hotel industry. So we've on our side, we've partnered, we've brought on client, Southern Sun. And we see just from the data that there's a massive increase in their energy consumption December and January, as you would expect. People go on holidays, etc. So you can almost see how you combine manufacturing with the hotel industry, and already you get to a point where you can get more renewable energy and less renewable energy wastage, which I think is sort of where the innovations are going. So playing a bit of a Tetris blocks there to get to a big number.
It sounds like playing with my diary on any given day, but definitely where the actuarial skills come in, that discovery, is renowned for in the marketplace. So there's this 20-year deal now with Glencore. Let's look at that as an example here. I mean, huge global miner and commodities trader. You've called this a new model for mining and industry. Is this your first project at this kind of industrial scale? And talk to me about what makes it structurally different from earlier corporate PPAs that we have seen, the likes of the Southern Suns, for example.
So we're very excited. I mean, Glencore is a wonderful company and wonderful partner on this. They are one of the biggest clients that we have on this. I mean, we have partnered with Sasol on a different initiative. Impala Platinum is also one of our clients, and we deliver energy. We're going to deliver energy to their refineries area. But the Glencore one, what I think sets it, what makes it a little bit different is a long-term contract. It's 20 years. And there are very few companies in South Africa that have a view of their energy consumption. In 5 years' time, 20 years seems almost extreme on that. And what the innovation really does, or what the model really does, is companies have a level of protection on this, but what they would like to do is they want to take as long as possible a contract because it gives them optionality, and it allows them to access long-term prices, which of course are cheaper than short-term prices. So it's a cost exercise on that. But the big risk is especially in the mining area, and we've seen of late, things go up and down. Consumption changes, production changes, mines close down, things happen. And what we've sort of done with Glencore is to say, if you have enough companies and enough mines and enough businesses all over South Africa, the likelihood of all of them stopping at the same time is very small, really, on that. And it's a risk that we can manage and we can take. So what you can actually say to businesses is that, you consume energy, you run your business. And if, for example, you can't consume the energy, there's ways in which we can manage that risk for you on the other side. So you can actually have a 20-year view of electricity without the worry of having to pay 5-10 years of electricity when you actually don't consume it. We have the means and the ways to put that energy elsewhere, because I think one thing is certain in South Africa, we need more renewables. And we're confident that we can place that energy elsewhere. So it gives them that flexibility, which I think is very valuable.
And I think, it is a good example of structuring to try and get to financial close, which is always, the challenge in these projects. So maybe you could just walk us through what it actually takes to get a project of that magnitude over the line. And what's your typical timeline that you're looking at, and where do the biggest risks usually sit that you're then trying to solve for?
It's a complex process. So the IPP that we worked with on this, our first two projects actually is Red Rocket, and they actually reach financial close. And that, I think the complexity, especially to get to financial closes, is what they are really, really good at. One thing that came out recently, you saw that grid survey where they asked, how many projects are ready in South Africa, called shovel ready, which is you always got to put that in inverted commas, because one person's shovel ready is different to another person's. But be that as may, there's over 200 gigawatts worth of renewable energy projects in South Africa being considered. I mean, which is way more than we need. It talks about the potential on this, but then if you take that and look at the projects that actually reach financial close in a given year, it's less than 1% of that, which means that there's supply coming, which is very exciting and very good, but the complexity to reach financial close it's hugely complex. It is very, very difficult to do, and it requires a lot of things. It takes years before you even consider a project to take forward. A lot of authorizations, a lot of studies. It varies between solar and wind. So, wind, you often put up a massive met mast, gather years worth of data to understand if the wind is good. It's a lot of studies, a lot of authorizations, environmental authorizations, land use. There's a long list of things to get in place, and a lot of investment that has to happen on risk. And people are doing it, which is very exciting. But then comes you need a client to take the energy, which in this case, it's us taking the energy and giving it to customers on the other side. But you need grid connection as well, which is always a big item. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot of activity and excitement around grid development happening in South Africa. But it's going to take time. So often, the biggest hurdle for new projects connecting is grid availability. So we have the land, the sites, but you can't evacuate the energy to businesses, and new lines need to be built. And often that is where projects get stuck. So to get a project to financial close can take years. It takes millions and millions of investment by the IPPs, and getting it all across the lines. It's massive funders. I'll give you an idea. The Terni Solar Park that we just closed, it's over 5 billion rand in investment in South Africa. It's thousands of jobs to construct it, and not everyone can do that, and not every bank's going to lend money for over a decade in order to facilitate that. So a lot of risk management, a lot of putting things in place to make sure that everyone's comfortable, and then you have to do it all in the realm of bringing the tariff into a affordable levels so that people actually want to take the energy. So, I take my hat off to these IBPs who have to manage these complexities, and they've done it very well.
Yeah, I was chatting to Solar Group the other day, and they had that very publicized spat with Renegen over land use rights. And you had, helium gas versus renewable solar, two competing energy sources. Eventually, they managed to find each other, but it was quite a protracted and quite a heated affair there. Just one example, a component of that risk that you're talking about. There's so many more that you've got to manage. And then there's, the grid's probably the big one at the moment, isn't it? I mean, when you look at just the way our market is structured, say, versus a Europe. I mean, Europe has a naturally more interconnected, more decentralized grid, less of that utility monolith that we have. I mean, it was just all Eskom, and largely is still all Eskom. Is now going to be managed by the National Transmission Company. So there is that unbundling. But what are the major challenges, and equally, I guess, opportunities that you're encountering in scaling grid-connected renewables, especially when it comes to the private sector wanting to collaborate, wanting to wield that power, but finding that, there is that constraint in terms of the grid availability?
Yeah, so the thing that we've seen is sort of over the last decade, and I think, rewind to 2023 or even before that, load shedding. I think the allocation of money or revenue from Eskom was really allocated towards keeping the lights on, which was definitely the right thing to do at that point in time. And what we've seen is that the amount that was intended to be built from a grid point of view and how much was actually built, there was a massive gap between that, right? I think, at the time it made sense, but now we're playing catch up. And the minister has taken a very progressive view to say, listen, we need to accelerate this, and we need private investment and companies to come in. And they developed sort of the transmission development program where, similar to REAP back in the day, you have private companies who can help and build and manage this and operate it as a wonderful mechanism, and that's sort of kicking off now. But I'm not very familiar with the complexities of building transmission lines, but you have to cover enormous distances. You have to get permissions to put these things on people's land. It takes time to connect it. These are massive projects. So there's a lot of activity now. We'll see how this plays out and when construction starts. But what I think it's going to mean is that the pace of renewable energy adoption or new project adoption. So the plan now coming out for the integrated resource plan coming out now as well. In order to meet that level of demand, you're going to have to build these projects, and we're thinking, that it's going to take years. So what we're going to see probably is not necessarily an acceleration or maybe, or we hope there's still being a lot of projects built over the next few years, but the real potential of projects are going to be unlocked in a few years' time when these new transmission lines are actually operational, and new capacity is being unlocked. And I think, if you saw, there's this curtailment also coming through now that will unlock more capacity. I think there's some innovative ways coming through from the NTCSA to try and find new ways to get more projects connected to the grid without impacting everyone. So I think there's a big focus on that. It's just going to take time.
And then you've got the rules of the game that need to be established. Back to your original point, we're in year one. We've got the SAWIM, which is, I think, the South African Wholesale Energy Market Exercise, and all of the key energy players coming together with the regulator, with government, private sector saying, well, what are the rules? Let's now set the rules of the game if we're going to have a liberalized energy market, which will benefit the country enormously. Now, if you're an executive listening to this, you're probably thinking about your own energy costs. And if you're not, then you clearly you're in a sector that doesn't really use much energy at all. But I mean, what are the top three things you, as a business leader, should be understanding before taking the plunge into renewables, or maybe speaking to an energy trader like Discovery Green?
I think there's a few things to consider, but if I to sort of narrow down to three, I think the first one to really consider and take into account is, I think, the cost of delay really on this. So there's wheeling has taken off. There's a lot of big businesses doing it, so it's not as novel as it used to be back in the day. So people, often take the view to say, listen, renewable energy prices have come down considerably over the last years. Let's sit and wait and watch and see what happens. And that might be a strategy that plays off, but often what people don't take into account is the opportunity cost. So renewable energy today is more affordable. So if you are able to take advantage of it today, or start procuring already today, you have years of financial savings, and that opportunity cost, if you don't do it, if you miss out on that, I think is going to be far greater than any technological advancements or reductions in costs coming into the future. I mean, we worked it out. Every 2 years of delay, you need a 10% drop in the cost of some renewable energy technology. So, it's sort of, you got to play that out. Do you believe it's going to drop by more than that? Then maybe wait. But our view is really that, given that it's going to take time to connect to the grid, delay is often one of the biggest risks. It's not if you should do it. It is when you should do it. And our view is as quick as possible. Another, I think, important factor to take into account is, we have carbon taxes scheduled to come from 2030 onwards. And this is going to, there's various models out of that, but one thing is clear, is that it's only going to create more costs for electricity, given that, the majority of South Africa's energy generation is still coal-based. And, that is just the nature of our history, and it's going to take time. I don't see a world without it, or definitely not in the short term. But there's an emissions factor associated, and that's going to add quite a big chunk to your cost of electricity. So renewables, I think that gap to renewables is only going to widen. And I think the last one really to take into account, which is I think critical, is you see the increases coming through, and CPI protection is really valuable. Now I do think we're going to see lower increases going forward, but the getting into something that gives you that CPI protection, so that you can start budgeting and planning your investments and business growth going forward, is hugely valuable. So that's something really to keep in mind.
And it's amazing how many mid-market sized industrial businesses are out there that, and I've seen a couple of private equity deals, Torio recently, Talisman, and these are big businesses with national footprints. They're not necessarily listed, but hugely energy intensive businesses. And, if they're not thinking of this now, they're losing that competitive edge and their ability to plan with every day that they lose. And, if you're exporting, you've also got CBAM. In Europe, that is going to be a barrier as well. So I think there are more than enough drivers. Just lastly, I've got to ask you, Andre, beyond what you're doing, obviously internally in building this business, there's the question of policy influence. What role do you think companies like yourselves at Discovery Green can and should play in help shaping South Africa's energy policy agenda, especially around liberalization and creating the rules of the game and the investment certainty that we need?
So I think we have a big role to play on that, and we're trying to be part of the conversation wherever we can be, because we're the new players. We're one of the players. We are a trader within the electricity market, and there are lots of different players. You have IPPs, you have distributors, there's an enormous amount of activity happening. And I think what view we can give is that we're stimulating new investment really in the market, and we know and have experience now as to what it takes. Some experience, not decades of it, but we have some experience in terms of what it takes to unlock new investment. In order to get that new investment, you need to have a market that is conducive and encourages it. And our voice really at the table, whether or not it's at NECOM level, or in the press, or at different forums. I think NERSA has never been more busy in its life with all the public hearings and things that it's having at this point in time. And just to voice our opinion and our considerations as an input to that is critical. I think the number of people voicing it, if you've ever been to a NERSA hearing, public hearing before, a few years ago, it was very few people that actually attended and commented on. And now I think, it runs over by hours just because of so many people providing input and opinion in it, because there's a lot more stakeholders involved. So I think it's a good thing. At this point in time, while we're forming the rules, the regulations, the policies, how things are going to work, you need as many inputs as you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Andre, thanks so much for your input today. Andre Nepgen, head of Discovery Green, for reminding us that South Africa's energy future it's importantly shaped by government policy, but it isn't waiting for government policy. It's being built right now, solar panel by solar panel, megawatt by megawatt. And as corporates seek price certainty, sustainability, and greater resilience in their business, I think it's partnerships like these that could well define the next phase of our industrial growth as a country. You've been watching Business Talk on Business Tech.